Hello and welcome to the latest Watching Brief Special News Bulletin. And once again, as you can see, you're stuck with me, Andy Brockman, flying solo because although Marc's much better, he's still not quite up to the full on-camera Watching Brief experience. So hopefully next week we'll be back to our regular service and back and forward. But at the moment, I'm here to tell you the story of a property development in Lincolnshire, which is causing ripples in the heritage community because of the potential implications for heritage protection nationwide. Basically, just months after UK heritage bodies failed to protect the concept of setting for historic monuments and scheduled sites by allowing Shropshire Council to greenlight a housing development close to the national important hill fort at Old Oswald Street, and that was against the advice of major heritage bodies, including Historic England. Another planning case, this time in the historic cathedral city of Lincoln, threatens to set a legal precedent which further reduces the protection the planning system offers even our most important archaeological sites. Now, the threat has come about because a local property developer, Mr. Andrew Long, has filed a planning application to excavate a swimming pool as part of a programme of work at a Grade 2 listed hotel called the White Hart in Bailgate in Lincoln. Now, that's sandwiched in between Lincoln Castle and Lincoln Cathedral. It's close to the historic centre of Roman Lincoln and is part of or situated within an area of scheduled archaeology. The Heritage Impact Assessment submitted with the planning application, which is a routine document, notes that the highest levels of heritage protection are found within the immediate area of the White Hart. There are 37 listed buildings and a lot of scheduled monuments, including the scheduled area, which covers much of the top of the uphill area of Lincoln. And that stood for decades. It's a well-known, very protected area of national heritage and archaeology. Now, Mr. Long's Travel Sector Property Group purchased the White Hart in 2022. It's part of what Mr. Long's described on the hotel website as, quote, a major redevelopment and significant overall enhancement scheme for the St. Paul's Lane, Bailgate and Castle Hill quarter of the city. That scheme also includes a Grade 2 star listed early 19th century building called the Judges' Lodgings, which Mr. Long purchased from Lincolnshire County Council in 2023 on a 999-year virtual freehold. It's still retained by the council, but the freehold is so long that it's effectively Mr. Long's building. Now, however, while archaeology is not a block on sensitive development, Mr. Long's current planning application is controversial because the swimming pool project is sited on one of the most archaeologically important areas of one of the UK's most historic cities. It's got the history of Lincoln dates back to at least its foundation by the famous 9th Legion, the Hispana. That's the Legion of the Eagle of the 9th fame. And there is well-preserved, deeply stratified archaeology across the city, which has been observed and recorded since at least the 19th century. That's archaeology which is protected by legislation and by national planning policy guidelines, which identify Lincoln's archaeology by default as being of national significance. Now, the swimming pool project would result in a slot in excess of 13 metres by 5 metres by 2 metres deep being cut into that stratified archaeology. And an evaluation has already demonstrated that medieval walls are present, and which one of the growing number of critics of the proposed pool, as a geoarchaeologist and TV producer, Dr. Samantha Stein, points out it's close to Roman structures which were recorded in the 19th century, but for some reason don't seem to have been included in the desk-based assessment of archaeology for the current swimming pool project. Now, at the core of the opposition to the proposed pool is the fact that the National Planning Policy Framework, or NPPF, which underpins all planning decisions in England, states that the greater the importance of the archaeology thought to be present on the site, the greater must be the justification in terms of public benefit for its destruction. Now, in that light, Mr. Long's swimming pool would seem, on the basis of his own documents, to be one of the sort of at the nice to have end of a development rather than being economically essential for the success of a hotel business. As assessments of public benefit are also submitted as part of the planning application, the estimate in fact is that the hotel will deliver just 1.5 full-time equivalent jobs to the local economy and a speculative £200,000 per year to the local economy based on a claimed additional room occupancy at the hotel. Now, even if that figure is accurate, that's just £550 a day spread across the entire city, or indeed, if you want to look at it in a different way, just barely pence per person of the Lincoln's population. So it seems to hardly fall into the category of critical infrastructure, even critical local infrastructure, which could justify the destruction of nationally important archaeology under the NPPF. Critics are also concerned at what seems to be another break in with both the letter and the intent of the National Planning Policy Framework. Mr. Long's archaeological impact assessment and statement of public benefits suggests that the existence of the archaeological work itself could represent a public benefit in terms of public engagement and outreach. In fact, Section 211 of the NPPF is specific that such public benefits can't be used and can't be regarded as supporting or justifying in any way the loss of archaeology as part of a planning application, and not least of nationally important archaeology. Now, those kind of statements are a serious matter, as they could have the effect of materially misleading officers and councillors making the planning decision, especially as the desk-based assessment commissioned by Mr. Long as part of the planning process reminds the developer and the local authority planners that, and I'm quoting, all open spaces within the boundaries of the upper and lower Roman city form part of Lincoln Roman Colonia, Lindum, a scheduled ancient monument, and the archaeological remains inside the hotel are of equivalent significance and importance. And the DBA also admits, quote, the adverse impacts of the loss of a small area of nationally important remains cannot be denied. Yet, as the critics of Mr. Long's scheme argue, the Lincoln planners appear to be allowing local policy and preference, for example, for developing boutique hotels to support the city's tourist offer, to trump national heritage policies set by the government through the NPPF. Essentially, as was the case at Old Oswestry, in deciding Mr. Long's planning application, Lincoln's planning officers, and if it goes to committee, its local councillors, have been placed in the position of interpreting and potentially deciding national policy towards some of the UK's most sensitive archaeology. And according to the critics, including Dr. Stein, the system of checks and balances which should protect the archaeology have been found wanting. Now, the critics argue that had the development system been working as it should, at some point before Mr. Long's application was even submitted, somebody in the planning system, either Lincoln's officers, the city archaeologist, or his own consultants, should have exercised a duty of care towards their clients and should simply have told Mr. Long that the project wasn't compliant with local, let alone national guidelines, and then, rather than have it rejected out of hand, work with him to reconfigure the plan and hotel spa, in fact, in a way which would be compliant. Indeed, someone, certainly including his own consultants, could have suggested that with the application of a little imagination, as been done in a number of similar sites in Canterbury, York and elsewhere, when important archaeology has been uncovered during building works beneath later buildings, the excavations could be preserved for display even under a glass floor, making for a unique talking point and arguably one that's of much greater and longer lasting public value than a boutique-sized swimming pool for a boutique hotel. Now, to sum up what's at stake for the regulation of UK heritage if Mr. Long's application is given the go-ahead by Lincoln's planners, Dr. Stein told the Pipeline, the approval of this private pool development will be a loss for heritage, for archaeology, for national planning policy, and for the government, and for the public. It will be the culmination of poor council advice, lack of understanding of planning policy by developers, and lacklustre research. Dr. Stein concluded with a warning to professional archaeological bodies and regulators, including statutory consulting Historic England. If Lincoln City Council ultimately approved the application of a private pool within the White Hart Hotel, it will set a dangerous precedent for heritage across the country. Lincoln Council's planning officers are currently deciding if opposition to Mr. Long's application is such that it must go before a full planning committee meeting rather than simply being decided behind closed doors by council officers. The consultation closes in a couple of weeks' time, and a decision about whether the White Hart application could come as soon as the 9th of April. Meanwhile, having asserted that there was no significant archaeology present at the White Hart, developer Mr. Long told BBC Radio Lincolnshire that I am at a loss to understand where Sam Stein is obtaining her information from. Dr. Stein responded on X, Twitter, pointing out that she'd actually read his own desk-based assessment. If you like what we do on the Watching Brief, and if you find the things that we say interesting or important or even annoying, we'd ask you to support us on Patreon, or you can buy the Pipeline a Ko-fi. And if you think the articles and the videos are worth reading and watching, then please share them through your social media networks. And other than that, see you next time.